Tell musicians when balloons will be used in church. Okay, got that. Sorry, guys. They're just so fun. Well, we have got to pray before this one, so let's be in a spirit of prayer. Dear God, we pray that the words of my mouth, the meditations of all of our hearts, and the laughter of our bellies might be acceptable in your sight, O God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, welcome. Welcome once again to Holy Humor Sunday. I don't think it was really due to me, but I have learned that there are several other disciples of Christ congregations that have begun this tradition, and I can't wait to see how theirs went. I know Deb Bolin, who's a good friend of some of our folks down at, not Carthage, down at Cambridge, is doing it today. Although she does not have nearly as beautiful locks as I do. Well, welcome to Holy Humor Sunday, a chance for us to enjoy the joy of God and the laughter of the Spirit. Speaking of welcome, an impoverished old man applied for membership in a very, very wealthy church. The pastor, in meeting with him, tried to put him off with all kinds of evasive remarks. Eventually, the old man figured it out. Figured that he was not really welcome in that congregation. So he decided to tell the pastor that he would think about it, just so the pastor could stew about this anxiety for a while. Well, after several days, the old man came back, and the pastor asked, "Well, did the Lord give you a message in your prayer?" "Yes, sir." "He surely did," was the old man's answer. "God told me that it wasn't any use. God said, I've been trying to get into that same church myself for forever, and they won't let me in either." Speaking of being shut out, a woman was at work when she received a phone call that her daughter was very sick with fever. She left her work immediately and went by the pharmacy to pick up the medicine that her daughter desperately needed. She got back to her car and found it, drat! She had locked her keys in the car. She was beside herself, but being a faithful woman, she bowed her head and prayed. She asked God to send her some help. Well, within a minute or two, an old, rusty, loud, banging car pulled up with kind of a dirty, greasy, big, bearded man who was wearing an old biker's skull cap on his head. This woman looked to the heavens and said, "This is what you call help, God?" But she was a faithful woman, and she was desperate. So the man got out of the car and asked if she needed some help. She said, "Yes, my daughter is very sick. I picked up this medicine for her, but I locked my keys in the car. I must get home. Is there anything at all that you could do for me?" He said, "Yeah, I can do something." He walked over to the car and almost immediately had the door open. She hugged the man, and through her tears she cried, "Thank you so much. You are such a nice man." He backed off. He said, "Lady, I'm not a nice man. I just got out of prison today. I was in prison for car theft, and I have only been out for about an hour." The woman hugged the man again, even harder, and with sobbing tears cried, "Oh, thank you, God, you even sent a professional." Well, speaking of professional conduct, a rabbi went to the local barber shop. Like I probably will have to after this. After his haircut, the rabbi got ready to pay the barber, and the barber said, "No, Rabbi, I don't charge clergy for their haircuts." So the next day, the barber found a loaf of Jewish rye bread outside of his doorstep. How nice. How nice, God. A couple of days passed, and a Catholic priest came in and had his hair cut at the barber also. He too got ready to pay the barber, and the barber said, "No, Father, I don't charge for clergy haircuts." So the next morning, Jim, Sue, he found a bottle of nice wine outside of his door. Wasn't that nice?
Cabernet?
Absolutely a Cabernet. Several days later, a Disciples of Christ minister came in to get his hair cut. And when he got ready, Houston, this may have been you, I don't know. When he got ready to pay the barber said in the same way, "No, Reverend, we don't charge clergy for their haircuts." So the next morning, the barber found 15 other Disciples of Christ preachers on his doorstep, ready for their haircut. Speaking of overhearing things, this one's fairly famous, but I have to do it because it's one of my favorites. A burglar broke into a home and was looking around. And as he was getting ready to steal some things, he heard a soft voice say, "Jesus is watching you." He thought maybe it was just his imagination, and he continued to figure out where the TV was and the computer, and sure enough, he heard it again. "Jesus is watching you. Jesus is watching you." Well, he turned on his flashlight, and what did he find but a parrot in a cage? So he asked the parrot, "Are you the one talking?" And the parrot said, "Yes." He asked the parrot, "Well, what is your name?" "Moses." "Moses? What kind of people would name their parrot Moses?" The parrot said, "The same kind of people that name a German Shepherd Jesus." Jesus is watching. Jesus is watching. Speaking of preparing yourself to meet your Maker, there are two men who arrived in heaven and met up with St. Peter at the same time. Now, I'll preface this one. Some of you gave me some really, really good jokes. I asked for it a few weeks back. Here's one of them. The first guy that came up to Peter had sunglasses, blue jeans, hair that was slicked back, and his name was Joe. St. Peter welcomed him warmly and gave him a golden staff and the finest silk robe. Well, St. Peter welcomes the second guy, who says, "I am Pastor Harris." St. Peter greets Pastor Harris also and hands him a wooden staff and a very coarse woolen robe. Pastor Harris looks confused, and he says, "St. Peter, why does this guy get a gold staff and a silk robe, and I, a servant of the Lord, get only a wooden staff and a coarse wool robe? How can that be justified?" St. Peter looks at him and says, "Well, it's really quite easy to figure out. That guy is a taxi driver, and almost every single one of his customers prayed and prayed fervently to God every time they were in his cab. Your congregation, however, slept most of the time you were talking." Except on Holy Humor Sunday. Speaking of the need to stay awake, a married couple were arguing about who was going to make the coffee that morning. It never happens at our house, but some houses it happens. It went back and forth and back and forth. Finally, the wife proclaimed rather self-righteously that in the Bible it says that men should make the coffee. The husband looked skeptical and asked her where in the Bible does it say men should make the coffee? And she opens it up and points and says, "Right here in Hebrews." Hebrews. It's a New Testament book. I'll look it up. Well, speaking of what goes good with coffee, an elderly man is dying in his bed. This one's serious. Please, get serious. Suddenly, death's agony was pushed aside briefly as he smelled the aroma of his favorite chocolate chip cookies wafting up the stairs. Gathering all his remaining strength, he lifted himself up from the bed. Leaning against the wall, he slowly made his way out of the bedroom and with intense concentration supported himself going down the stairs, gripping the railing with both hands. In labored breath, he leaned against the kitchen door frame, gazing wide-eyed into it. What would he see but there, spread out on the kitchen table, the countertop, and every available flat space were literally hundreds of his very favorite chocolate chip cookie. Was it heaven? Or was it one final act of heroic love that his wife would give him before he left this mortal world? Mustering one final great effort, he threw himself toward the table, landing on his knees in a crumpled position with one hand on the table. The aged and withered hand quiveringly made its way to a cookie near the edge. Feeling the warm, soft dough actually made the pain in his bones slip away. His parched lips parted. The wondrous taste of the cookie was practically already savoring in his mouth, seemingly to bring him back to life. What was that? What was that stinging that caused his hand to recoil? He looked up to see his wife with the spatula she had just used to smack his hand. "Stay out of those," she yelled. "They're for the funeral." Oh, was that a hiss? It's not getting better from here, I can assure you. Okay. Speaking of being close to death, an old preacher was dying. He sent a message to the banker and the lawyer, both members of the church, to come to his home. They were kind of used to this. When they arrived, they were ushered up to his bedroom, and as they entered the room, rather than asking for them to work on final documents, he just motioned his hands for them to sit on each side of the bed. The preacher grasped the lawyer's hand and the banker's hand, smiled contentedly, and looked up at the ceiling. For a time, no one said anything. Both the banker and the lawyer were touched and flattered that the preacher, the dying preacher, would ask them of all people to be with him in his final moments. They were also puzzled. The preacher had not given them any indication that he particularly liked them. They both remembered the long, uncomfortable sermons about greed and covetousness and avaricious behavior that made them squirm in their seats. Finally, the banker said, "Preacher, we are so grateful to be here in your final hours. But can we inquire exactly why you asked us to come?" The old preacher mustered up his strength and said weakly, "Jesus died between two thieves, and I was going to go to heaven doing the very same thing." Speaking of how one's going to go, and I want to tell you that this is from my beloved friend Craig. And Connie's here. Her mother, Romaine, is one of the most wonderful women in the world. And she is a storyteller extraordinaire and can sing up a good old Southern gospel song like nobody's business. And I'm going to tell her story in a fashion kind of like she might tell it, in order to honor her. I think she would very much be honored. 3 men went up to heaven, and St. Peter asked, "What caused all this death?" One man said, "I died of a heart attack." The second guy said, "I died of cancer." So St. Peter looked at the third guy and says, "What about you?" So the third man says, "Sir, I died of sinus." Sinus? St. Peter says, "Do you mean sinus?" Did something go wrong with your sinuses? No, sir, the man says. I done slept with the trucker's wife and he's seen us. Speaking of St. Peter, a Presbyterian, a Methodist, and a disciple pastor, and their wives were on a cruise. A tidal wave came and swamped the ship, and they all died. The next thing you know, they're all standing in front of St. Peter. First came the Presbyterian and his wife. St. Peter shook his head. I can't let you in. You loved money too much. You loved money so much, you even married a woman named Penny. And they went away to who knows where. Then came the Methodist. Sorry, I can't let you in either. You loved food too much. You loved to eat so much, you even married a woman named Candy. Then the disciples of Christ pastor turned to his wife and whispered nervously, "It doesn't look good for us, Fanny." Speaking of husbands and speaking of husbands and wives, I'm going to get fired. A minister was always complaining about his wife buying so many dresses, even though on the minister's salary they couldn't afford them. The wife's standing line was that the devil was always tempting her. Finally, he told her that the next time that the devil tempts her, she should say the very biblical phrase, "Get thee behind me, Satan." So, the next day when the minister came home, what would he find but his wife in a brand new dress? Astonished and not a little bit annoyed, he asked her, "Didn't you do what I suggested you do?" She said, yes. I suddenly found myself in the dress shop. I suddenly found myself with this gorgeous dress on. And then I remembered what you said. And I shouted out, "Get thee behind me, Satan!" And Satan said, "Oh my, that dress looks even better from the back." Speaking of Satan, a man is walking down the street when another man walks up to him and says, "I am Satan." To which the first man sticks out his hand and exclaims, "Greetings, Satan. I've been waiting to meet you. I obviously married your sister a long time ago." Okay, that one should have been cut. Shh, remember. Okay, speaking of married couples yet again, 3 couples. Okay. One elderly, one middle-aged, and one newlywed. And if I get in trouble for this one, Jim Schimmel and Larry Krell both said I should do it. Okay. One elderly couple, one middle-aged couple, and one young newlywed couple. They applied for church membership. The pastor informs them that the requirement for new parishioners is that they abstain from marital relations for 2 weeks. And then they can become members. The couples all agree quite readily and go their separate ways. After 2 weeks, they return. The pastor asks the elderly pair if they were able to abstain for 2 weeks. "No problem at all," they both replied. It was easy. And the pastor says, welcome to our church." He turns to the middle-aged couple and he says, "Were you able to abstain for 2 weeks?" "Well, it was difficult," replied the wife. "By the end of the 2nd week, I had to sleep on the couch. But we did it." "Congratulations on overcoming temptation," says the pastor. "Welcome to the church." He then turns to the newlyweds and asks if they were able to abstain for 2 weeks. At first it was no problem, the husband said. But then one day, my wife was reaching for a can of corn on the top shelf. And she dropped it. And when she bent over to pick it up, I was so overcome with lust, I took advantage of her right then and there. "I'm sorry, Pastor, I'm sorry." "You "You understand that this means you will not be welcome in our church ever again," says the pastor. "We know," says the young man. "We're not welcome at the supermarket either." Speaking of the mistakes we make, a man was being tailgated by a stressed-out woman on a busy boulevard when suddenly the light turned yellow just in front of him. He did the right thing to do. He stopped, even though it was fairly sudden. Well, the tailgating woman had to screech to a halt. She laid into her horn, screaming in frustration, throwing a few choice words into the air, not to mention a few unmentionable gestures. She let that driver in front of her know exactly how angry she was to have missed going through that intersection. She had a very important thing to get to. Well, as she was in mid-rant, she heard a tap on her window and looked into the face of a very serious police officer. The officer ordered her to exit her car with her hands up. He took her to the police station where she was searched, fingerprinted, photographed, and placed into a holding cell. After several hours, another policeman opened the cell door and escorted her back to the front desk, where the assisting officer was there to give her her personal belongings. She was angry, and he said, "I am so sorry for this mistake. You see, I pulled up behind your car while you were blowing your horn, flipping off the guy in front of you and cussing a blue streak at him. But then I noticed the Choose Life license plate, the What Would Jesus Do bumper sticker, the Follow Me to Sunday School bumper sticker, the gold cross hanging from the rearview mirror, not to mention the chrome-plated Christian fish emblem on the trunk. Naturally, I assumed the car was stolen." Speaking of people feeling privileged, I want to offer to you a cat's view of creation. On the first day of creation, God created the cat. On the second day of creation, God created humanity to serve the cat. On the third day of creation, God created all the animals of the earth to serve as potential food for the cat. On the fourth day of creation, God created honest toil so that humanity could labor for the good of the cat. On the fifth day, God created the sparkle ball so that the cat might or might not enjoy it. On the sixth day, God created veterinary science to keep the cat healthy and the human broke. And on the seventh day, God tried to rest, but then remembered the litter box needed to be changed. Speaking of interesting pets, this Baptist couple felt it was important to own an equally Baptist dog. So they went shopping at the pet stores. At the kennel specializing in the particular breed that they wanted, they found a dog they liked quite a bit and asked, "Do you think this dog is Baptist?" The pet owner said, "It is the most Baptist dog we have." They asked the dog to fetch the Bible in the shop, and the dog ran off, found it immediately, and brought it right back. When they instructed the dog to look up Psalm 23, he complied equally fast, and using his paws with dexterity, found it. As a matter of fact, the couple tested him, and he was the best sword drill student that they had ever seen, finding every verse that he needed. The couple were so impressed they purchased the animal and went home. That night they had their friends over, and they were so proud of their Baptist dog and his new skills that they called the dog and showed him off for a while. Well, the friends were impressed, but they asked the question all of us would most likely ask, can he do any of the typical tricks that dogs do? Well, this stumped the couple. They hadn't even thought about their dog doing the normal dog tricks, so they said, well, let's try it out. Once more, they called the dog, He came over and they clearly said, "Heel, boy, heel." Well, quick as a wink, the dog jumped up, put his paw on the man's forehead, closed his eyes in concentration, and began to pray. They were furious. They had been deceived. He wasn't Baptist, he was Pentecostal. Speaking of denominational affiliations, we are bringing this to a close. A man and a woman were engaged to be married. One day he comes to her heartbroken, having gotten a most undesirable diagnosis at the doctor's office. "My darling, I'm afraid we must not marry. You see, I am rheumatic." She looks at him just as sincerely and says, "Oh, my dear man, what difference does it make? You go to your church and I'll go to mine." Speaking of going to church, 3 churches. A Baptist, a Methodist, and a Disciples of Christ worked together to sponsor a community-wide revival. After the revival had concluded, the 3 pastors got together like we pastors sort of do and discussed the results. The Methodist minister said, "The revival worked out so great for us, we gained 4 new members." The Baptist preacher said, "We did better than that. We got 6 new members." But the Disciples of Christ pastor looked particularly proud. He said, "Well, we did better than both of you. We got rid of the 10 biggest troublemakers we ever had." 23. It's a very good one, but not appropriate, Cody. Speaking of the importance of church, the new and improved church, and we'll end with this one. No, actually there's one more. The new and improved light church. Does it seem to you that churches these days just expect too much of their people? That's in all the news reports and all these studies about churches. We just expect too much from our people. Well, before you remember that Jesus told us to pick up our cross and follow him daily, I have a new church announcement that I'm going to present to the new visioning team of Franklin Circle Christian Church. Has the heaviness of your old-fashioned church got you weighted down? Try us. We are the new and improved light church of the city. Studies have shown that we have 24% fewer commitments than any other church. We guarantee to trim off that guilt because we are low Calvin. That is, we are the home of the 7.5% tithe. We promise a 40-minute worship service, a 10-minute sermon. Next Sunday's exciting text is the story of the feeding of the 2,725. We have only 7 commandments. You pick which one you want for each day of the week. We just use 3 Gospels in our contemporary New Testament, which we call good sound bites for modern human beings. We take an offering every other week. We accept all major credit cards and accept an easy payment plan. We are closed the first week of hunting season. We are closed for March Madness, and we are closed for the entire Cleveland International Film Festival. Yes, the new and improved light church of the city could be just what you're looking for. We are everything you want in a church and less. And finally, speaking of the perfect church, here are some things that we pastors dream of hearing in our churches. Number 1, I couldn't find a place to park outside. Praise God! I was so enthralled, Pastor, I had no idea your sermon went 25 minutes over. Number 3, personally, I find sharing the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ more enjoyable than playing the lottery. Number 4, you know, I've decided to give that $100 I normally give to the television evangelist to this church. The 5th thing pastors like to hear, I volunteer to be the permanent teacher for the middle school Sunday school class. It's a dream, isn't it? Forget the denominational minimum salary, Pastor. Let's pay our pastor so he can live well and thrive. Number 7, I love it when we sing hymns I've never sung before. I love it. Number 8, since we're all here so early, why don't we just start service now? Number 9, Pastor, the Board of Elders discussed it, and we would like to send you to that church growth seminar, only we want you to go not to the one in Des Moines, but the one in Rio de Janeiro. Number 10, things that we pastors like to hear. Nothing inspires me and strengthens my commitment to Christ more than our annual stewardship campaign. And finally, number 11. Hey, it's my turn to sit in the front pew. So may God be glorified in some way, shape, or form, in the laughter that we have shared and the joy that we all have. I will take all suggestions for next year, any great joke that you have that's appropriate, and let me know if you vote for it not to happen again.